right, hold on.
Educational.
Can you not see it?
I don't know if there's a way you can change the writing to white. Yeah.
Yeah, one sec. Oh, loud.
Someone got the builders in.
Okay, is that any better? Do you see that?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
better.
Okay, just a couple of minutes, guys. There's some anagrams on the screen. They are all words to do with education. They're all educational terms. See how many you can find. There'll be all things that you would have had discussed with you the last couple of days, or we'll be discussing during the sessions this morning. All familiar words to you.
So do you want us to just identify the words, not necessarily what they stand for?
No, just the words. Just the words.
Okay.
Write down as many as you can.
Okay.
Everybody know what an anagram is? If you don't, then ask me to clarify. Little extension task for you as well. Once you've found the words, can you think of any synonyms for that word? Prishka, what does synonym mean?
Synonym is a word that means the same as a word. So similar words that have similar meanings.
Excellent. So example would be close or shut. They both mean the same. Yeah?
Yes.
So once you've found the word, see if you can think of any synonyms to go with it. Just 2 minutes.
They're really hard. They're really hard.
They're all familiar words to you. Just think of words that we use every day in our jobs.
Goodness me.
I'll give you a clue. There's 3 of Ofsted's keywords in there. So there is a word right up at the top as well that's not been highlighted white, but it is white, in case you missed that.
Okay.
Right at the top on the left. All right, 1 more minute.
Finished.
Who's that?
We've got five brains here and phones.
Ah.
So.
Have you done your synonyms as well?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Have you done your synonyms as well? 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 Have you
That's what we're doing now.
What? How are you going to get synonyms to this? Seriously. Ah.
Okay, stop there. Okay, if you could put in the chat function, how many that you think you've got? One and a half.
Yeah, I was just almost getting there slightly, and I found it hard, but I definitely got one. So, yeah. 10 out of 10. 5. I find it's like the Countdown Conundrum.
Okay, I'll tell you what's there. You can tick off if you've got it. Okay, so we have accredited. Could anybody think of a synonym for accredited? Quite a tough one, isn't it? I'd say maybe qualification, maybe. Okay, we had impact. Anyone think of a synonym for impact? Area 1, did you think of any synonyms for impact?
Outcome.
Outcome.
Yeah.
Effect.
Effect. Yeah.
Effect, yeah, good. Okay, intention.
Aim.
Aim, yeah, good. Objective, yeah. Okay, next one, assessment. Give a synonym for assessment. Evaluation, good, Mike. Any others?
Testing, maybe.
Yeah. Judgment. Well done, Danny. Gold star. Opinion, yes, brilliant. Okay, next one, feedback. Any synonyms for feedback? Advise, yeah, comment, critique, opinion, yeah, sometimes it is opinions. Advice, yeah, excellent. Progression. Improvement, yep, very good. Advancement, succession. Oh, I love these words. Differentiation.
Adaptation.
Yes, very good. Individualize, yep. Ooh, delimitation. I've never heard that word, Mike.
Yeah, it's one I just made up.
Oh, okay. We get the gist. Engagement.
Active participation.
Brilliant. Interaction, yes.
flop my English degree.
Teaching? Yep, involvement, tutoring, yeah. And finally,
knowledge sharing.
Oh yeah, love that. And finally, learning.
Intellectual growth.
Who is that?
We'll leave it on him.
You are resident thesaurus.
English degree.
Amazing. Okay, so that's obviously
take
just
it off me.
that's just a little starter task. What do you think the purpose of that particular starter task was? If you'd like to answer, then just put your hands up and we'll come to you. What do you think? What are we getting out of that starter task? Or you can put it in the chat box. Anybody? Am I going to start picking on some people? Go on then. Oh, Mike put his hand up. Okay, go on then, Mike. What is the intention of that starter task?
I don't know, maybe looking at different ways that we actually introduce these subjects. I'm waffling now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So today we're looking at teaching, learning and assessment. These are all teaching, learning and assessment words. They're all words that you need to be familiar in order to be good at that topic. So yeah, it's just introducing you to the words. Okay, anything else? Anybody else? Prishka, why do you think I've asked you to do synonyms?
I think because in the session that we just finished earlier this morning, I don't know whether it was you or Danny who said that some names for industries are very important, that you use the actual technical names. Mm-hmm. Because in that context, they have a particular meaning. So yep. I think it's for you to give us a heads up into what we're going to learn and the words that we should mark or make sure that we understand what they mean and can use them confidently in our assessments and feedback and all of that.
That's it, yeah. It's so that you can be able to use them in context, these words, you can use them in context and you understand exactly what they mean. Just looking at some of the comments here, creating a culture of active thought. Yeah, absolutely. But also, we're just very simply, we're embedding some English in there, aren't we? You know, synonym is an English term and we're looking at different ways of using the same words, of using the same meaning. So it's a very good way of embedding English into there. Also, a starter task, it just gets you ready for that lesson. So it's good if it does link to what you're covering that day. But the most important thing is that it's just creating a, what would you call it? Like a tone for the lesson. You know, we're moving from not being in a lesson into a lesson and we're just having a little transition in, and something that everybody can do and everybody can be involved in. That's going to set the right tone for the lesson and get people prepared to learn. Right, I'm just going to come off of this because I just want to go back to what we missed out in the last session just quickly. Okay. Okay, has that changed? Does everybody see that screen? Evidence in learning, progression and impact?
Yes.
Yep, cool. Okay, so where we left at in the last session an hour ago, we were looking at the program trackers. So we'd had a look at assessment. We briefly looked at feedback. Unfortunately, we had to whiz through that. So you are going to have to go back and look at those slides, I think. And then we looked at the program tracker. And obviously, all of that is very, very linked. And it will end with you evidencing the learning and the progression and the impact there. So just a question for yourselves, really, just to sit and think about yourselves. But how can you judge whether all of your candidates are learning something in your lessons and that they are making the progress they are capable of? So every single candidate in every single lesson, how do you know that they've got what they need to out of it? You can add your thoughts into the chat box if you like, but also just to ponder, because I think sometimes that gets lost. That every single individual needs to have made progress there. And how do you know? How do you know what success looks like? Do they know what success looks like? Okay, so there's a couple of ideas there. Asking them to score their learning and feedback before and after. Yeah, putting it into real life examples, bring the learning to life, being able to recall and use in the future. Yeah, absolutely. Direct and open questioning. Yeah. So we're going to be covering a few of those things today and looking at maybe some of the pros and cons of them and different strategies. So just going back to what we were looking at earlier, we were talking about assessment, and in a minute we'll move more on to the teaching and learning, but just to finalise the assessment. So it's fundamental that candidates have a clear understanding of what they're trying to learn. So that is going to be your learning objectives. How they're going to recognise achievement, so what their learning outcomes are. And then what success looks like, so what the criteria is. So in terms of assessment, the learning outcome is what they need to learn. The assessment criteria is what they're going to evidence to show that they have achieved. But that applies in every lesson as well. So even if you're not doing formal assessment in a lesson, you still need to know, what does success look like? What do they need to have been able to do in order to achieve? And then why are they learning this in the first place? So the bigger picture, how does this connect to other parts of the curriculum? And then like Mike said, how does this apply to real life? How does this apply to the job that they want to do or the next course that they want to go on to? So to be able to evaluate the impact that we've had on that student, we need to know where they're starting from. We need baseline data because we need to judge whether there has been progression there. So have you got your starting point right? So strategies for diagnosing current understanding and getting your starting point right. Now, this is not all of them, by all means, but this is just a couple of examples. So questionnaires, I did that with you in the last session, quick questionnaire just to see what people's confidence levels were. Mini quizzes, we did that in the last session as well. Mind maps. And then other strategies such as thumbs up, thumbs down, RAG ratings, and number ratings, which is, I think, what Yasmin said, where you say, can you score yourself between 1 and 5? And they do make a very quick assessment of where people are. But you just need to be careful with those, because although they will help you to gauge what you think, what those candidates think they know, they don't give you any quantitative data. It's just an opinion. And so that can sometimes be difficult to measure against because they could just pluck a number out of thin air. So although they can be useful, try not to use them all the time. I'd say use them when you're in the gist of a topic, but I think at the start of the topic, you need something concrete that then they can go back to and be checked on it again to see if they have made an improvement. And obviously all of that comes out of initial assessment. So you'll hear the term initial assessment a lot. An initial assessment should be happening in every single lesson that you do. So you do formal assessment, a formal initial assessment when you first meet those candidates, and you sit down and you learn about them and you write targets and you check their maths and English levels. But it doesn't just stop there. Every single lesson, you need to conduct initial assessment because you need to find that starting point and you need to know what they know already and what you need to work upon. Okay, so demonstrating progress and impact. So candidates need to know what they are aiming for and what success success looks like. So if you haven't told them what the learning outcomes are for that lesson, they're not going to know. If you haven't told them this is what you should have achieved by the end of this lesson, or this is what I would expect you to have achieved, they may not know. So even in virtual delivery, it's really important that you're sharing that information. Assessment for learning, so AFL strategies, they can be used to compare performance to targets. So as I said earlier, doing a quiz with them, checking the score, and then going back and doing the quiz again later on when they've done all the teaching and learning, that gives you something you can compare against. Self-assessment ratings. So as I said earlier, they might just pluck a number out of thin air. Helpful to do, but does it actually show that they have learned and they have achieved? Maybe not. And then a principal focus on whether the candidate is meeting their individual targets. So you've got your outcomes for the lesson, but you also know what targets your candidates are working towards. So in order to treat them as individuals, we need to make sure that there is a big focus on those during the lessons as well. So we're judging whether we've had impact in the lesson on those learning outcomes, but also have we had impact in terms of progression on those candidates' targets. Okay. Right, we're just going to go back to this lesson slide. Sorry, one moment. Okay, so for this part of the session today, we're going to be looking more at teaching and learning. Now, obviously, teaching, learning, and assessment, they're all very entwined. So a lot of what we will do, what we'll talk about, will be very similar to what we talked about in assessment. But as I said earlier, there needs to be some clear differences happening once they get to that final assessment stage. But remember, assessment is happening all the time. Formative assessment, informal assessment is happening during that teaching and learning. So we're going to look at the virtual learning, our successes and areas for improvement, look at some teaching and learning strategies, again, looking at the importance of evidence in learning and progression, and we're going to be looking at SMART targets as well. Okay, so yesterday I just sent out a quick survey asking what went well for people during virtual learning and then what hasn't gone quite so well. And I also asked people to reflect on whether they think that this is just a temporary change or whether they think it could lead to more permanent changes for the future and whether they will be happy about that. Is that a positive thing? So 9 out of 10 of you said you were happy for this to be a permanent change, that you are happy for virtual learning and remote learning to continue. Would anybody like to tell me what that percentage is? What is 9 out of 10 as a percentage?
90%.
90.
Not you, Prishka. Goodness sake. Jeremy, you're correct. 9 out of 10. Would you like to explain to everybody how you calculated that percentage?
Well, I just work. It's just because 10 is. I always think of 10 as 100%, and then worked in sort of units. But really, it was just because of familiarity. If you'd have said something like 7.2, I would have got the calculator out.
Well, a very simple way of calculating percentage is to divide the top number by the bottom number and then to multiply it by 100.
Yeah.
And that will give you the 90 that you need. So if you multiply 9 by 10, you get 0.9, times it by 100, you get 90%.
Yeah.
Again, these little things are very important for candidates to know. So as we're going through our teaching and learning, picking out and embedding those little skills are very, very important. Okay, so what you said, so successes, you said having one-to-one time discussions with individuals, having one-to-ones with learners with extra needs, the new programs that we were running, greater engagement on them, learners attending the sessions. So against all the odds, we managed to get learners there. Continuing to support the candidates and their engagement throughout courses while we're working at home, gave you that little warm, fuzzy feeling. Getting students to access a virtual platform, having that central space to use and access work. Yeah, I think that was a big thing because, again, it was new to so many people and a lot of people would have shied away from it before. Recreating a classroom atmosphere through Zoom, engaging candidates onto online platforms. Yeah, we talked about that. Increased candidates on program due to convenience. So people like to do it from home rather than coming in the classroom. And dealing with larger groups and making a difference to their confidence. And then our challenges. So some of them did not have resources to come online. This was a really common one. So technology was an issue, IT, phone equipment. That is still a challenge and it continues to be a challenge. Getting in touch with learners, trying to get them to commit to set hours. So yeah, that discipline, trying to get them their head around, these are our working hours and getting them to stick with it. Just engagement overall from some people. The opportunity to rephrase something in words that students might understand easier if they aren't live responding. Yeah, so not having those people in front of you and not being able to gauge whether there is understanding there or not can be difficult. Sometimes you just get a lot from people's facial expressions, don't you? And then getting wide group-based discussions going with lots of candidates. Absolutely, it's a big challenge. It's great when you're working with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but once you get to big groups, and it becomes a lot more difficult to manage, doesn't it? But despite all of that, 9 out of 10 of you said you were happy to move forward with it. So it's something that is going to very much be there for the long run, I think. So it's very, very important that we're looking at how we can overcome those challenges. Okay, so most of you should be familiar with Maslow, and if you're not, go away and have a look at it. If you've done teacher training with me, it's quite prominent in what we do. The pyramid on the screen there is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I think it's a very good way of looking at what motivates candidates, but also what may create barriers to engagement. And particularly if we're looking at virtual learning, some of the things there on the screen, they're things that we need to take into consideration. So according to Maslow, our bottom level needs, our physiological needs are, you know, things like shelter and warmth and things like that, hunger, thirst. If they're not met, then we're going to struggle to be motivated and to engage in education and then to move up to the top level, which is our self-actualization. Yes, Mike? You got your hand up, Mike?
Oh, no, sorry, have I? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry.
So in terms of online learning, just a couple of things to take into consideration there. So in terms of our physical needs, it's going to be those accessibility issues. So whether they have got equipment, whether they can do it at those times of day, have they got children there, have they got the correct privacy, have they got the right surroundings, things like that we need to take into consideration. Those social needs, so particularly at the moment, people are feeling very isolated, they may not have relationship and peers who they can rely upon, or they might be in environments that just aren't good for their emotional state. Again, technological, the know-how, and the emotional, so the psychological impact of everybody at the moment and their mental state. And you have to think about all of those things when you think about these needs. And unless we can get them to the top of the triangle, they're never ever going to reach their full potential. So we need to think about those barriers that are standing in the way and how we can help to remove them. Okay, so overcoming the barriers. So we need to maintain a strong classroom culture. So we need to make sure that what we would do in a normal traditional classroom is pretty much what we're doing in an online one as well, which means creating a safe space and setting that standard from the start. So we need to be saying, these are the rules, this is the conduct, and this is what you need to be working from, in order to keep everybody safe, in order to keep everybody engaged, in order to make sure that everybody reaches their full potential. We need to build a connection with them. So we need to find out stuff about them. We need to be able to have those conversations. You know, how was your football last night? Did you watch that program you liked? Did you see this? How's your family? Inside and outside the classroom, we need to build those connections with them. We need to get them to trust us. Speak briefly and to the point. Now, it's a little bit different today because I'm working with all professionals this morning, so I'm doing a lot of talking. So this is more of a sort of a lecture-based thing. But really, the kind of candidates you're working with, a lot of the time, their attention span isn't very long. So whether we're working in the classroom with them or we're working online, we don't want to be talking at them for too long. We need to be thinking about ways to make them more active in the session rather than passive. If we give them way too much information at once, they're not going to retain it. We need to blend communication methods. So don't just stick to one communication method. If you're using Google Classroom and you're going on there and you're typing up what they need to do for the day, think about other things you can do as well. Could you do a recording telling them what to do? Because sometimes things get lost in written word, which don't in spoken word. And we need to ensure our sessions are fun, practical and relevant. And again, that's inside the classroom and outside the classroom. We need to be replicating that classroom environment online. So we're not just there to pass on information, we're there to get them to learn and we get them to participate. And really important, we need to set those working hours. So these are the hours that we're meeting, these are the hours you're working. It's really important that you stick to them. And that for most, there will be consequences. And, you know, I don't want you to start threatening, telling the job centre, but if they were in the classroom, you know, they would know this register is getting passed on to the job centre to show them that you've been here and you've attended. And it's exactly the same thing. It will still get passed to the job centre each day. So they need to know that you can't just pick and choose. These are your hours. And if we're in the classroom, you would be there. Okay, any questions so far?
Jenna,
Yeah.
what would be nice, I think, is I think a lot of us do use classrooms now when we start a course, and it'd be nice to have sort of the standards in place and that we can just fine tune as required. Like something.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry.
Did you miss out on yesterday's?
I did. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was covered yesterday, Mike. So it has been done now by Lisa. I don't know if it's been sent out yet, but yeah, it was something we recognised a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, so there's now going to be a set of conduct in place to be sent out and agreed with all the candidates from the start. I think I'm right in saying that was covered yesterday. Yeah. Yeah, so we'll make sure that you get that. But yeah, it's absolutely it's something that we recognise. Again, it's new for us. But, you know, tutors need to all have the same rules that are implemented each session and that they can share with the candidates from the beginning so they know what the expectations are. It's so important because you would do it in the classroom, wouldn't you? Absolutely.
Good, thanks.
Okay, other things to overcome the barriers. So set clear goals. So as I said, we need to know what the starting point is and they need clear goals in order to get there. And if candidates can see that they are achieving those clear goals, they're likely to be more motivated and more engaged because they get that sense of achievement. You need to establish ways to monitor progress. You need to decide how you will know the session has had an impact. So what are those strategies you're going to use during that session or at the end of that session to decide whether those candidates have achieved whether they've been successful, has it had an impact on them? There needs to be a good balance between active leader and active observer. So by that, I mean, you are there as a teacher to facilitate teaching and learning and assessment. We are not university lecturers, so we're not going to stand there and just give loads of information and then ask them to go away and do it. We're working in adult education. It should be active. We should be there to facilitate, but we should be there to help guide them rather than just give it all to them. There should be a lot of guided discovery there. So we should be asking them to do things and we step back and we watch, and then we can give some feedback on it. Very simply, check in with them and see how they're going. And as I said, use all those AFL strategies, those assessment for learning strategies, to actually have quantitative data to see whether they progress from starting points. Okay, any questions before I move on to the next slide? Again, conscious of time. Okay, so blended learning. Hopefully you've heard this term. It's been in education for a long time, but it's more prominent at the moment because blended learning basically means blending different types of delivery. And predominantly that would be online learning with classroom-based learning. And this is something which has started to happen now. Some of our classes have gone back into the classroom and they're doing a summer online learning, and it will start happening more over the coming weeks as we go through our back to classroom strategy. So just a couple of points here on when you're using both. So you need to be considering what learning would be best taught online and what would be best suited to the classroom, where it is more structured. It is definitely more structured in a classroom than it is in the on-learning environment. You might consider moving all of your assessment to online. And I know some of you have challenges with that because your candidates haven't got access, but we're moving to a much more digital culture. So if they can complete it online and email it to you or upload it, I'd recommend that's what you do, because one, we've got a better audit trail, it's better for saving, and also it allows you to give that feedback on it straight away as well, rather than waiting for it to come in on a paper-based version. And as I said earlier, consider recording short videos to introduce new topics that could be watched at home ahead of them coming into the classroom, or could be watched at home ahead of you meeting virtually. Quite time consuming to begin with, but once you've got those videos, they're set up. So when you run that course again next time, you can send the same video out. And as I said, there's so much more that you get from somebody by seeing them talk than from written communication sometimes. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, moving on. Right, so how learners retain information. So as passive learners, we remember only 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% of what we hear and see, so listening and looking at the same time, 70% of what we explain or we teach somebody else, and 90% of what we show or demonstrate to somebody else. So from that, you can see that the best way for us to learn is by doing it. So if we're sitting passively and we're listening or we're reading from the screen, we're much less likely to retain that information. It's good to start that way, but then it's really important that candidates are going away and they're doing activities that allow them to implement and to use that information and putting it into context, going out, using it into real life settings, or you know, go away. I'm going to teach all of this about a CV. Now I need you to create a CV so you can see what a CV looks like. And there's a really good model there on the screen that shows you, gives you ideas about the types of activities that you can be doing with them. And this applies to online learning as well as in the classroom. And really what you want to be doing is starting at the top and then working your way down. So you start with the talking and the listening and the reading, and then you move your way down in order to cement that knowledge and to encourage them to get that deep learning, because people can recall information, but that doesn't show that they've learned it. In order to learn it, they need to be able to use it. They need to be able to apply that information, be able to tell you where they would use it in a different setting, for example. Okay, any questions? No, okay. Right, so lesson planning. So teaching and learning strategies. So I know at the moment, lesson planning has not been top of everybody's agenda during lockdown, because we had some people who were online, some people who weren't. We had people working on different programs. But as I've explained previously in this session and in the last session, unless candidates know and we know what we want the impact to be for that session and what success looks like, we are not going to be able to demonstrate that they have learned and they have progressed. So lesson planning is very, very important. And even if you're not filling out one of our normal lesson plans during virtual delivery, it's very important that you have documented what your intentions are for that lesson. And it will be asked during observations, can we see those? And it will be asked for audit, because we need to know that you know what your intentions are and that you know what success looks like. So in terms of lesson planning, you need to know what the bigger picture is. So just in a short sentence, what are the headlines for your session? What is it that this session is going to do? And normally that would be the aims. What are the aims for that session? As it says there, making links to vocational contexts are good, because it means that candidates are more likely to engage with them. They realise why it's relevant and how it's going to benefit them. The learning outcomes. So the learning outcomes, they outline what the candidate should achieve in the session, and they're shared with the candidate so they become focused on the purpose of the session rather than simply completing it. So they know why they're there and what they're doing and how this is going to affect them and how this is going to impact them. The success criteria. So that links directly to the learning outcomes, and it describes what successful learning will look like. It shows them the end product. So you might want to phrase your learning outcomes as, most people will know this, some people will know this, all people will know this, or don't just take the learning outcomes straight from the qualification. Think about exactly what it is that you want candidates to achieve in that session, and think about what success looks like, and amend those learning outcomes so that they can see that. So if the learning outcome is, to improve communication skills, you need to think about, well, what is it exactly they're going to improve in this lesson? Okay, so most people will demonstrate that they can use facial expressions effectively, something like that. Also, by knowing what success looks like, it enables you to be able to see, and the candidates to be able to demonstrate whether they have met those learning outcomes. And it shows them what success looks like. Okay, always, as I said, important to implement that starter activity, as I did today. Grabs their attention, hooks them into the topic, or you might want to use it to recap learning from a previous session as well. It could also be used to test knowledge. So it could be that initial assessment. And then your learning activities, again, even if it's not really detailed, what is it that you plan on doing within that session? In terms of Ofsted, they're not looking for really detailed lesson plans. That's not a consideration for them. They just want to see that there is intention there, that you've thought about what you're going to do and what the candidates are going to achieve and what it looks like. So more meaningful, purposeful activities jotted down rather than going into lots of detail about what it is exactly that you're going to be doing. The differentiation. So again, differentiation has changed recently, and we'll look at it more in a moment, but Ofsted aren't looking for obvious differentiation anymore. But saying that, they still want to see that you have thought about how you're going to adapt it and make those reasonable adjustments for each individual. So you need to state how the teaching assessment methods or the resources meet the different needs of those candidates. And it might simply be through questioning, using different questionings, or it might be like a scaffolding of tasks. So some people are going to do this, some people are going to do this. Your assessment of learning. So we're not talking about formal assessment here, we're talking about the informal assessment that's happening within your teaching and learning. So this is your formative assessment. The formative assessment, as we've talked about, that is when you can be giving them all that guidance and all that support, telling them what they need to improve, telling them where improvements can be made, helping them with their spelling and their grammar, etc., etc. And a big difference is going to be that when we change our assignment briefs in the next week or two, what you will find is that the formative assessment feedback is no longer going to be within the assignment brief. Now that is because it's confusing for you, because as I've said earlier in the previous session, once they get that assignment, you can no longer be giving them any teaching and learning. So the formative feedback should have happened way before they got to the assessment. So we are going to remove it from the assignment brief, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. Actually, it should be happening more than ever, and I'm sure you are doing it. But what will be important is that you are evidencing that, so that when we come and observe your sessions, or we just come for a learning walk, or we just come for a chat, we say, could you please provide evidence of how you've given learners formative feedback? We want to see it in the teaching and learning stage, not in the assessment stage. So there's going to be a big change there. And once we do that and we send it out to you, we'll provide a bit more clarification. And then the plenary. So drawing the learning to a close, evaluating, summarising, checking understanding, all of those strategies that we've already discussed. So alongside that, within your lesson plan, these are the things that you need to be thinking about. So the learning and the achievement, English and maths development. So although you might not be teaching maths and English, you should be always looking to help improve your candidates. There is an expectation that vocational tutors are still helping candidates to improve in those subjects, particularly English. Personal development, behaviour and attitudes to life, society and their community. So things like equality and diversity, safeguarding, British values, health and safety, things like that. Future aspirations, so taking people's individual goals into consideration within the lesson planning. So they want to go into this job, so we're going to look at a task that's going to be focused around that job to help them. And then all the vocational skills and IT skills as well. So as I said, there is not an expectation that we see a really detailed lesson plan, but we are looking for a well-planned lesson that includes techniques that are going to help those candidates to learn. Any questions? Excellent. Okay. So, as I said, we touched on this already, but with differentiation, so it's not used in the education inspection framework from Ofsted really anymore. But instead, tutors are required to meet the individual needs of learners. So it's more about looking at each candidate as an individual rather than differentiating. Therefore, effective differentiation, it is obvious. So you still are going to have to differentiate, because we're looking for that during observations. Is learning individualised? It's just not really referred to as differentiation anymore. So we're looking for evidence of it in the planning. So we're looking for intent of individualisation. We're looking for it during lessons, so when it's implemented. And then we're looking for evidence of how the lesson methods have helped the candidates on an individual basis to progress as they can. So we're looking for the impact. Okay, so evidence in learning, progression and impact. Obviously, we looked at this from an assessment point of view, but looking at it from a teaching and learning point of view. So initial assessment, talked about that already, setting those SMART targets. In a moment, we're going to go back onto SMART targets and spend some time looking at them. But in order to evidence that there's been learning and progression there, as I said, we need to know what the starting point is. We need a target to work from. And we're only going to do that by using initial assessment. Communication and feedback. So you have to reinforce and support progress to enable it to happen. So whether it is post-it notes, whether it is email, whether it is verbal, there needs to be evidence that you have given that candidate feedback at all stages of their journey. And then there's assessment of learning activities, so strategies that involve candidates explaining or recreating a concept in their own words, either verbally or in writing or in a practical way, are far more effective for identifying misconceptions and are great opportunities for providing high quality individualized feedback and therefore ensuring greater progress. So quite simply, if a student can recall certain facts at the end of the lesson, this does not necessarily mean that they have learnt that information. It's just been transferred into their memory. So you need to be checking to make sure that they understand it. So it's not just being able to identify it, you need to check for understanding. Okay, so setting SMART targets. So we know why these are important, everybody knows. We need that starting point, we need something to work from. But an issue that we find a lot of is that people aren't showing their candidates how to write a proper SMART target. And the reason a SMART target is so important is because it is achievable. If we're setting targets that are unachievable, then the candidates are not going to get that sense of achievement, that sense of fulfillment, and then they're going to become disengaged and they're not going to be motivated. So we all know what SMART stands for: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So we're just going to spend some time looking at each of the letters of the acronym, and then you're just going to go away and do just a really short activity for the last 10 minutes. I'm just going to whiz through these. Now, I've uploaded a worksheet to the Padlet so that you're going to have this for reference, and obviously I'll put the slides on there as well. Okay, so specific. What is the task to be done? What are the details? This is the key area of the role. So example 1, create and be able to cook a meal containing rice. That is specific. They need to be able to create a meal containing rice. Measurable. What evidence could be used to show if and how well the task has been achieved? What will be different if the task is completed? So example 1 is suitable to feed a family of 4. Achievable. If the task, is the task possible? Is it fair? Taking into account you and your current situation. So example 1 was using your knowledge of rice gains last lesson. So it'd be very unfair for us to ask a candidate to go away and learn how to cook rice if we haven't showed them how to do it, for example. Relevant. Why is this target important? Well, for this example, it's because they need it to be able to achieve criteria 3.1. And then time bound, when should the task be done? So in this example, by the end of the lesson. So the overall target will look like, by the end of this lesson, using your knowledge of rice gains last lesson, create and be able to cook a meal that contains rice, suitable to feed a family of 4 to the standard required to achieve criteria 3.1. So it's very, very specific. And if they can tick off all those things, then they know that they have achieved it. So there's lots of things in there to tick off. Another example there: to reduce your level of swearing, stop using the F word in the classroom or workplace according to the college and workplace rules, and to ensure your language is suitable for the workplace from now until your next review on the 30th of April. So we could say to stop swearing, but we haven't defined what swearing is. So if we're very specific about, right, I want you to work on not using that one word, that's more achievable. And then that's something that they can measure it against. Okay, so just 5 minutes then. What I'd like you to do, if you just want to jot down that table on the screen there. So let's just look at short-term targets for now. So there's things that really we want to be achieving by the next review. So if the next review is in a week or 2 weeks, we want those short targets. Think about candidates that you've worked with previously. Now, a lot of the things that people want to improve are things like verbal communication, written communication, time management, things like that. So what I want you to do is using this table, I'd like you to write a short-term target for a candidate. You can use one of the suggestions that I said, so communication or time management, or you can think of something different. And I want you to, in the table, try and break it down into those sections. So specific, what is it that they want to achieve specifically? How will it be measured? How will it be achieved? Why is it relevant? So relevance may be in order to apply for a university course or in order to apply for this job. And then what is the time limit on it? If you've all, has everybody written down the table? Because I'll go back and show you the example so you've got something to look at. Okay, so there's the example there. So literally, let's just say 3 minutes, just trying to put part of the objective into each part of that table. And if you've got any questions, then shout them at me. Or I'll put them in the chat. Yeah, the table again, yeah. I'll just put it up just for a moment, just so that I can go back to the example. Okay, so go back to the examples. I'll just whiz through them so that you've got them. So specific, what is the task to be done? Exactly. Measurable, what evidence could be used to show if and how well the task has been achieved? Achievable, is it possible? So have they got the right information, etc. Why is it important? Why do they need to have done it? Why is it relevant to them? And what are the time restrictions on it? So when should they have achieved it by? And we're doing a short-term target, so we want it to be in the very near future. Sorry, dog's barking. Okay, guys, 30 more seconds. See what you can get written down. Oh, sorry, my dog's barking. Okay, guys, stop there. Okay. Would anybody like to share what they've written down? Got any volunteers? You could have a couple.
I could talk about what I did if you like.
Yeah, that'd be great, Jeremy. Thank you.
So, yeah, so the goals, it's all about spelling, basically, improving the spelling. So the long-term goal So the long-term target for the specific. No, actually, I'll go through the short-term goal first. Actually, so short-term target, I put to use a dictionary to check spellings of words.
Yep.
And then the medium-term target beneath, I put to always check the spellings of the words after each sentence.
So I would say the specific would be more to improve my spelling in order to be able to write a cover letter or something like that.
Yeah.
And
actually, I put that for the long-term one, actually.
Okay. But you need to think about what is it specifically that they want to achieve, and then it would be measured by using the dictionary. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, for example, in the short-term target, I put to actively demonstrate using the dictionary. That's for the short-term one.
Yeah.
Medium-term, I put to put a very small signature after each sentence to show they've checked it.
Yeah.
And then for the long-term target, I put the tutor to actually check their work and check the spellings of the work.
Mm-hmm. So on the short-term target, why is it relevant to them? So what is it apart? Why is that target relevant? Why is it important?
I thought because it shows that they are. So basically, if you've got the long-term targets to improve the spelling so they can write a cover letter accurately,
Mm-hmm.
I thought the short-term target is breaking that longer-term target down into achievable pieces, if you like. And I thought in the shortest term, it's word by word, i.e. the dictionary, having that to hand to help them with the spelling of each word. And then the medium, it's sort of sentence by sentence or paragraph by paragraph. Building
So so what I would say for the short-term one, I would, Danny's written here what I was about to say. I'd focus more on certain words to make it more achievable. So so what I do is maybe focus on one unit that we're looking at. So, you know, from now until Friday, you are going to going to complete your tasks. This isn't how you'd write it, but you're going to complete the tasks for Unit 1, and you're going to concentrate on being able to spell these key terms, for example, because then at the end of that week, you can look back and check whether those key terms were spelt correctly. So remember, we want them to be able to achieve these goals, okay? Now, if we're asking them to check every single word in their work, that's not really achievable. They're going to come disengaged with that. But if we concentrate on maybe 5 key terms that are really important in CV development or cover letters, and we're going to make sure that you know how to spell those 5 words, that is more achievable. And it means by the end of that week, when they look back and see that they've achieved it, they're going to get that good sense of achievement, and you can demonstrate progression. They've progressed.
Got it. Yeah, got it. So, so it could be maybe an initial assessment or initial discussion. These are the words in cover letters or CVs that you're struggling with, that you need practice with, and then there's a more finite list rather than it being too generic, I guess. Something to aim for. I see.
The big thing with these short-term targets is that they cannot be generic. They need to be really, really focused, and just keep thinking in the back of your mind, in order to demonstrate and evidence progression, it needs to be achievable, and that means it needs to be as specific as possible. And it needs to be individualized for that candidate, because for one candidate, it may be 5 words. For another candidate, you may say 10. For another candidate, you may say 1, because actually there's one word that they continuously spell wrong, and they may have such severe dyslexia that saying 5 words is just going to set them off of a spiral. So you think about what is achievable for that candidate, and you may not do it over a week. You may say by tomorrow, for example, but just make it very, very specific and individualized to them. Danny, you had your hand up.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to try and help you out with an example. Think about how school children improve their spelling. So they get short-term goals each week. They get 5 individual words that they have to then demonstrate that they have used and learned and practiced and at the end there is a kind of a summative assessment of a bit of a test. And then what that does is it rolls over to say, yeah, you're up to date with those 5, or actually you're missing these 2. Let's change that short-term target again and do them 2 next week more intensely and move forward. There is nothing wrong with giving somebody a spelling test. In fact, it is seen as outstanding practice for an adult to be challenged within spelling tests. And it's a go-to for Ofsted, and as in because it's simple. Because you can do what Jen is saying, which is individualize it to, these are our industry words that you're going to be using when you are successful. These are the ones you're going to need to spell. And now you are at this level and you over here are at this level. And that allows you then to be able to use the short-term targets as a stepping stone to achieve. Or, I don't know if Jen has used this analogy, your short-term targets and your short-term goals are jigsaw pieces. They're puzzle pieces. So the more that you have, the more complete the puzzle is at the end. When you've completed it, you've reached your long-term goal.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you. Mike, you had your hand up. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, only I totally agree with what Jeremy's saying. I also had I have a couple of students that can only write in the American style using Zs.
Yeah.
So I did set a short-term goal as to to clearly focus on and look at, even making sure that they had their computer set to English language, version, and to try and help them, because I could see that their CV had lots of Zs in it. So whilst that wasn't directly spelling, it was just trying to get them to focus on using the English version of specific words, and using what Danny said, I gave them a list of 10 that were common ones they kept doing wrong.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, we're running out of time, guys, but I've put this template, I've put a worksheet onto the Padlet, and we'll send the Padlet out again, the link. Use this with your candidates when they're writing their goals. Get them to understand why it needs to be so specific. And then once you start using it and you start seeing how actually it has so much more of an impact, because they can actually see their achievement and their progression, it will become a lot easier to use. Okay, so just revisiting our aims and outcomes. Obviously, we didn't get a chance to do it in the last session, but we've covered a lot this morning. Thank you so much for your engagement. I know it's been a lot of talking from me, which I don't tend to like to do, but there's been so much information to try and get across to you. Unfortunately, it's the only way of doing it. But the video will go up onto our YouTube, and I'll also put the slides onto the Padlet so you can go back and look at the specifics. Just one last thing that I'd like you to do, and you reflect on the session this morning as well if you were in it, but I'd just like you to put into the chat bar for me if possible, or send it to me individually if you are in the group. I just want you to think of, even if it's just one thing that you've taken away from today's session, one thing that you think you've learned. And then if you do have any questions and you didn't want to say them in front of the group, or there's things you just need further clarification on, could you just send them over to me? Again, you can do it privately, you can do it by email, or you can put it in the chat box, and then I'll look to address those as well. But thank you so much for your engagement. Hope you have a lovely Friday afternoon and a lovely weekend. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jen. Just to let you all know, guys, I've just added the link to the YouTube channel where you can pick up all these videos. It's in the chat box. All right.
Thank you.